Recording now. Perfect. Aכילס, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, great. So firstly, my name's Aכילס, or Achilles, like the Achilles heel. I'm not too tech savvy as much as Itai is, so please, if I don't see anyone's hands or questions, please, Itai, just show me towards them so I can then make sure I answer everyone's questions. I haven't done Zoom calls in a while in terms of group calls, so please, if anyone has any questions or I'm speaking too fast, just let me know and I will slow myself down.
Sounds good.
Okay.
And introduce yourself, let them know who you are,
Yeah,
why the reason we are talking. Perfect.
So just to correct Itai, I wasn't actually born in Limassol. I was actually born in South Africa, but my parents are both Cypriot by blood. I moved to Limassol when I was 13 years old. I grew up in Limassol from 13 until 19. After that, I went to do university in the United Kingdom. And then I moved back to Cyprus about 7 years ago, and I joined the business with my father. And we set up basically a real estate company in Limassol that's helped a lot of international investors as well as international purchasers to either relocate to Cyprus or invest in Cyprus. Not necessarily just Limassol, but Limassol is the city I grew up in, and it's the city I know inside out. So the main purpose of today is to really focus on Limassol and to talk about what is Limassol, where is Limassol, and to give you a bit more information as to potentially why you would maybe choose Limassol over any other town in Cyprus, if that makes sense. Okay, so let me just share with you firstly a quick map. So Limassol is a town that's predominantly based in between the three major cities. If you have to look at the city's populations in terms of size, Nicosia is the biggest city in Cyprus with around 400,000 to 500,000 inhabitants. Limassol is the second city in Cyprus between 250 to 350. And then you've got Paphos and Larnaca, with Larnaca at about 150 and Paphos around 100. So the population of Cyprus in total is between 1 to 1.1 million according to census, where Cyprus is 3 times smaller than Israel, and we're about 9 times less population than you guys have over there. So one of the main things you will realize, especially when coming to Cyprus, a lot of the questions I get asked the whole time is where is everybody? It's a difficult thing to explain that Cyprus is quite a spread out territory. We don't have the congestion that a lot of other countries in Europe and you guys have in Israel as well. And then also it's a cultural thing in Cyprus that not many people take public transport or walk, where you'll end up basically driving from door to door. So you don't really feel the walk on the shopping streets that you usually get in other towns. In terms of Limassol, it's as I said, it's between the three major cities, so Nicosia, Larnaca, and Paphos, where you will need basically at most 1 hour to go in between the three different towns. The 2 international airports in Cyprus are based in Larnaca and Paphos, where the advantage of being based in Limassol is that you have the ability to choose either airport to fly out of Cyprus, whether you have work in Europe or you need to go back home to Israel, where the flight times are 55 minutes and 1 hour. So it's a very, very short flight to and fro, and it's much easier to pick each airport because it doesn't really make a difference if you're living in Limassol which one you travel to. In terms of Limassol as a city, if I have to just give a bit of understanding and knowledge about each town, Nicosia is the capital. It's the last kind of divided capital in the world. It's where all the government offices are. It's where all the embassies are, and it's where the major universities are. It's a very, very stable market. It's a much more local-based market with a touch of international companies. And it's where you usually go if you ever need to deal with government offices, because all the headquarters are based in Nicosia. Limassol is much more the, let's say, the heartbeat of Cyprus. if we have to compare it as a sister city to anywhere in the world, we will call it a baby Tel Aviv in terms of the lifestyle and feel that you have walking around the town. It's not so much, it's never really been a touristic city where people choose to come and spend their holidays in Cyprus, because our beaches are not as nice as Paphos or Larnaca or Ayanapa or Brodaras or Polis, because they have much bluer seas, they have much better sunsets. So Limassol has always been the town that has taken the residential living of people who want to be on the seaside, but during the winter seasons to not have that feeling that you're living in a seaside resort. So Limassol, whether you come January, February, July, or August, you will still feel the same buzz around the town. Shops don't close in the winter time, and all the major international basically companies that are choosing to come to Cyprus, you tend to find that if they're not based in Limassol, predominantly their workforce comes and lives in Limassol, because it's got the most going for it in terms of what international people are looking for when they're choosing to either live in Cyprus or want to spend more than 2 to 3 months in Cyprus. By saying that, it does mean that Limassol is much more expensive than the other towns in Cyprus, because it's much more in demand, rents are much higher, property prices are much higher, land is much higher in terms of costs. Larnaca and Paphos, they're, let's say, growing cities as well. Paphos is a bit more, let's say, for people who are looking for holiday homes. I would say it's a seaside town trying to become a city. It's got a lot of news going for it in terms of they've just created a university in the city. They've got a couple of private hospitals. They've got one of the airports, and slowly they're trying to get 1 or 2 other universities to go into the city. Larnaca, on the other hand, has the big news and the big talk in Cyprus at the moment, because they've selected a very large piece of area over there that they're going to redevelop and make a very nice marina and promenade and new hotels. So in the last, let's say, 2 years, the big uptick in capital appreciation and the main area people have been looking in has been Larnaca. However, saying all of that, Larnaca still doesn't have the size or the status or the pool that Limassol has when people are choosing to relocate or live in Cyprus. So just again, to summarize a couple of the points about Limassol, it's the main investment hub of Cyprus. It's the second largest city, and 45 minutes from each of the airports. It's considered very, very safe. It has a high standard, relaxed lifestyle. It's got enough restaurants, hotels, entertainment, lifestyle that can keep people here year-long round. You know, it's got enough of those different style restaurants, different style entertainment venues that maybe other towns don't have. More recently, they have the largest integrated casino resort that opened in Europe, based in Limassol. There is an increasing number of university students who are continuing to choose Limassol and Limassol-based universities. It's also the only city in Cyprus that is going to have a golf course, which is basically attached to the city. The other golf courses that we have in Cyprus are between 20 to 30 minutes drive from any major city, where this will be the first one that is kind of you're there in 10 to 15 minutes and you're back in the city, and it's creating a new vibe in the area that I'll explain in a little bit. It's got probably the most international private schools in Cyprus. Traditionally, when you're moving to Cyprus, you will not be putting your kids into the public schools. The public schools are only in Greek. The educational level is quite low compared to the private schools. So what a lot of international expats, for example, myself, when my parents were moving from South Africa to Cyprus, they will always look at putting their kids into a private school rather than a public school. And the advantages to that is basically you're usually following a UK-based curriculum, where by the end of your school time, you are taking the equivalent of a UK-based degree, which then opens doors to the kids and the students to be able to go study in mainland Europe or in the United Kingdom. When I was growing up and when I finished school, essentially 80% of the students, whether they were Cypriot or not Cypriot, but people who were finishing the private schools, ended up going to study somewhere in a United Kingdom university, whether it be London, Manchester, Bristol, wherever they found the courses that matched for them, because it was a natural progression based on the school's leaving certificate that you ended up taking from the school. There's also excellent healthcare opportunities. We probably have the most private hospitals based in Cyprus, apart from Nicosia, which has much larger scale general hospitals. But you will find a good level of healthcare for you and your family as well if you do end up choosing Limassol. It's the preferred city for international officers to locate to, for the reasons I mentioned. It's got enough to retain the staff, and the staff wanting to live in the city and be close to their offices to live by. Even though the offices are more expensive, the businesses are still deciding to choose Limassol because their staff then have the year-round feeling of not being in a tourist town, and there's enough for the employees to do. They understand and they know that the workforce will need to be paid a higher salary and also be paid probably some contributions towards their rents, but it's the only way that they can really kind of attract the staff to come. The main industries that we have in Limassol are fintech, startups, shipping companies, forex industry, software companies, and now they're trying to start to attract investment funds and trying to attract an A category company like a Google or an Apple. But that's something that is going to happen probably in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, depending on what the government does and the incentives that they can offer companies to move here. It's a fast-growing city in terms of residential, retail, and office space. And more recently, we've expanded our port in Limassol, where we finally have a world-class passenger terminal, and it's the first time we're actually receiving large-scale cruise liners into Limassol, where it's the first time in my life that I'm going around the old town in Limassol and I'm noticing walking tours. So we've had over 300,000 people arrive over this summer into Limassol, and it's starting to be an eye-opener for a lot of people, because a lot of people kind of position in their minds that Cyprus is just a Greek island, where they don't realize it's its own independent country with its own self-sufficient running government, with its own incentives and own unique kind of atmosphere versus that what people get in Greece. The other big aspect of it is we're an ex-British colony, so we drive on the left-hand side of the road, and a lot of our systems are based off the UK judicial system. So our legal system follows very similar to what they have in the UK, and also our property way of selling and buying properties based on what the British did for us back in the 1960s and 70s. So you're much more secure in terms of purchasing property in Cyprus than, let's say, purchasing property in Greece, which is a lot of the times the questions I get: why Greece over Cyprus, even though Cyprus tends to be more expensive. Anyone have any questions on that before I kind of go to a Google map and talk about some neighborhoods and schools?
I think we will.
Okay, perfect. So let me just...
Someone just asked, why Cyprus over Greece?
Yeah, so essentially it's just for the comments I said. When you are buying in Cyprus, the property process is much more simpler than it is in Greece, even though Greece is maybe a bit cheaper, and also their residency program is a little bit better than Cyprus. I feel that the people who've gone to both territories always come back and say it's just a minefield in Greece. It's too big. There's too much not knowns and unknowns that people have to deal with, rather than just dealing with Cyprus, where it's much closer to home. It's a 30-minute flight. We're much more connected than you are, than Athens, for example. So I found that the people who start to compare the two territories, especially if they have the budget for it, they're choosing Cyprus over Greece. Okay, so now focusing on Limassol. Just switch to this view. Second. Don't know why it's still being very blurry. Very strange. Okay, so let's try to do it this way. Limassol is a city that is running over essentially a 20-kilometer coastline. Even though the city center is based around the Limassol Marina, the way the market works in Cyprus, the closer you are towards the seafront, it tends to be the more valuable or the more sought after area that the properties are in. If you are looking at Limassol, you say this is the Limassol Marina over here. If you want to cut the city in two from this road, you basically have east and you have west. When I was growing up in Cyprus, all the news and all the big investment was happening towards the east of Limassol, where you start from the marina over here, and then you come all the way out to where it says Park Lane Luxury Hotel. This is essentially the last real 5-star hotel that closes Limassol off in terms of a walking kind of coastline area. Between this area, you have pockets of neighborhoods which are very, very sought after. They're very, very popular with Russian clientele. It was the main area that was invested into in now, I would say, the last 15 to 20 years, where you get some very, very high-end luxury apartments and some very, very expensive villas in terms of living that have like unobstructed sea views based on the hills in Cyprus. Even though there's been a lot of sanctions put onto the European Union for Russian buyers, remember, Cyprus has been a country that has been working with Russia for many, many years, and we have a Russian-speaking community of over 30 to 40,000 people based in Cyprus and predominantly in Limassol. So even though there are big sanctions on them in the Western world, the majority of them who've made livelihoods and grown up in Cyprus, they're still based in Cyprus. So the more you drive towards the east, you will actually see a lot of the signage and information on the restaurants to be based in English and in Russian and in Greek language, which is quite unique. It's actually got a nickname, Limassol Grad, especially the more east you go. As you're coming more towards the center of Limassol, you then start to connect in neighborhoods where there are a mixture of restaurant shops, with the idea being that anything kind of below the highway is considered touristic, anything above the highway is considered more residential living. If you have to look at the map of Cyprus in terms of the distances and the topography in terms of the mountains, you will understand that Limassol starts at the sea and then very, very quickly goes up towards a mountain towards Troodos, which is essentially a 45-minute drive where you're going from sea level to 2,000 meters above sea level. So what you're getting is some neighborhoods in mountain areas that then offer views towards the city. And that is one of the main reasons why you will see that even though it might look like on a map that these areas are not residential and don't have houses on it, part of the reason is because they're on very high terrain and it's almost impossible to build onto it. So when you look at a map of Limassol, you will think that there's still a lot more scope in the east to expand into, but that's just simply not true. When you are slowly getting more towards the center, you'll see that the highway kind of breaks out a bit and goes up towards the mountain area. We like to distinguish between below the highway and above the highway. When you're considering below the highway, you tend to find that properties are higher in price. You tend to deal with more apartments rather than houses or villas. And you tend to find that a lot of the offices are based under the highway, closer towards the center, and that's where most of the life of Limassol is happening. However, saying that, you will realize that a lot of the private schools and the very good, bigger private schools are actually based above the highway. So if we're talking about schools, as for an instance, I went to this school over here, which is called Heritage Private School. More recently, they've now opened up the Island Private School just across the streets. You have grammar school above the highway as well, and you have Foley's as well, which are all meaning that if you're gonna be living in Limassol and you're gonna be going and traveling and taking your kids to the schools, it means you're gonna be having to connect over one of the 6 roundabouts in Limassol to then go up towards the mountains to drop your kids off. During the rush hour in the morning with the kids, depending on the neighborhoods you end up living and the school that you end up choosing to send your kids to, your drive time to your school can be anywhere from 5 minutes to potentially 45 minutes to get there. So effectively what you're trying to do is if you're going to be living and putting your kids in one of the schools above the highway, it's more recommended to potentially take a house or an apartment that is above the highway, because it'll mean it's easier for you to travel to the school during the mornings and in the afternoons to pick up the kids.
Achilles, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Pascal is well over there.
Pascal is over here. There's
correct.
There's 2 Pascals. There's the Pascal Senior
Correct.
School, which is down in the center,
the primary.
And the primary.
Exactly. So just need to mention it because some Israeli people are looking for Pascal as well, which is a good school, and there are many Israeli students there. So just they need to know that it's in that road as well.
Exactly. So let me just add Pascal. What I will do is I will share this
primary
map as well.
Perfect. This one. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. There's some of the primary schools are not actually located next to the senior schools. What I've done is I've only really put the senior schools on here. But if you Google the name of the school, you will also be able to see whether they have the primary school at that location or in another location in Limassol. Okay. Let's see if this works now. Maybe I can do it. And that might be a bit more sense. Change. There we go. So now it will make a little bit more sense, where you can see how this is where I was talking about. You can see that the mountain areas over here don't have much property on it, but that's because it's almost impossible to build in this terrain. Where if you're looking down in where the actual developed areas are of Cyprus, you'll see it starts from kind of here, goes up towards the mountains, and then spreads out towards the west. So ever since I came back to Cyprus, and when I was looking at the opportunities for investors investing in Cyprus, I was trying to understand where the market was going and what the market was doing. When I started looking at all the noise of what's happening in the west of Limassol versus the east of Limassol, it didn't make sense to me that people were buying property for twice the value in the east of Limassol versus the west of Limassol, because all the new projects, all the new big investments, all the new funding from the government is all happening towards the west and not the east. Even though the east probably has better terrain, nicer locations, nicer neighborhoods, I have a feeling in the next 5 to 10 to 20 years, you're going to see a big fundamental change happening towards the west of Limassol. So if we're talking about the west of Limassol, this is where the new port terminal is that I was discussing, that we can now accept cruise liners in. We have over here Ladies Mile Beach, which to me is probably the best beach in Cyprus, not in Cyprus, sorry, in Limassol. It's very, very flat. It's able to walk out. It's sandy. It's got a lot of nice beach bar restaurants that are, some are kid friendly, some are adult only. But a lot of the investment into the beach bar has happened in the last 2 to 3 years. Is someone got their hand up? Yeah.
Yes. And there are some questions that people would like to ask you.
Yeah.
Following the things that you have said. Daniel?
Achiles, are there any international preschools?
Yes, there's a lot. As I was saying, all the international schools, if you Google the name of these schools, you will be able to see their preschools. So almost all of them, especially if they have high schools, will have a preschool link to them.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other question right now?
There
Hi,
are some questions. Yes.
Yeah, I'm interested mainly in neighborhoods or maybe villages that are next to the schools area, the heritage islands, and all the other.
Yeah.
So if there is something that it's more like family friendly, when you can, let your kid maybe not be alone there, but it's more or less family friendly. Thank you.
So if you're looking specifically at heritage and the island school, you have a choice. You can either be in an area called Ekali or Ayafila. By being in these areas here, you're more closer to the city center. It's quite built up areas. Let me see here. You can see that there's loads of houses, restaurants, and roads. There's also loads of public schools. So this is predominantly areas which you will find a lot of houses with small apartment buildings, and you will often find a lot of kids playing in the streets in the evening times, or going to one of the schools that are based in these area in the evening times to play football in one of the fields. At the same time, if people want to feel a bit more outside and within nature, if you go to areas like Balothia, Fasula, Paramitha, they all kind of have access roads that get you to the school in about 5 to 10 minutes. And these neighborhoods have kind of developed and swelled over the years, because the developers and the people who are building realized that there was a demand from the people staying in these schools to have accommodation in the area. So if I'm going to focus on, for example, Balothia and Paramitha, you're saying to go from over here to the city center of Limassol, you'll need about 15 to 20 minutes, 25 minutes if there's traffic. But to go from Balothia to the Heritage Private School, you need essentially 5 to 10 minutes in the morning to be dropping the kids off. One of my best friends growing up, he actually was brought up in Paramitha. When I first started going to Paramitha, he was like maybe one of about 50 houses. Now there's about over 400 or 500 houses in this area as well. You will find that the houses in these areas, even though they don't really offer kind of views towards Limassol, you will tend to get bigger houses, more garden space, pools, and also have better value for money than if you were going to take something that was located closer to the city.
Yeah, thank you.
No worries.
Achiles, there are other questions that I always get from people when they ask me about buying an apartment, buying a house, and things like that, about sidewalk, because there are no sidewalk in Cyprus overall compared to Israel. Yeah. And also parks. So if right now, let's say I have a kid, 10 years old, 9 years old, and I would like to let them go to the park alone and things like that, where can I find a house like that, an apartment? Because overall, we couldn't find something like that in Cyprus. I'm not saying only in Larnaca, Paphos, or Limassol, but overall. And if you know that if it's something that I'm saying it means Cyprus is going to change.
Yeah. So the problem is, I personally think, and it's my view, I think that the government's parking strategy and car strategy isn't correct for the country, because essentially when we're building buildings, we're having to allocate one parking spot per one apartment, and it doesn't make a difference if the apartment is 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom. You're only needed to provide one parking space for that apartment. So what you tend to happen is, when you have these neighborhoods and in the evening times and larger apartments, when some families might have 2 to 3 to 4 cars, you have the one car parked in the parking space, and you have the other 3 cars that are then parking on the streets and the pavements. And even though we might have sidewalks, what everyone does, and it's a cultural thing, we park our cars on the pavement with kind of the tires on the pavement, and then it kind of blocks the sidewalks, and then everyone ends up having to walk in the street around the cars. It's a cultural thing. It annoys me, but I can't say that there's something that's going to fundamentally change in the next few years that is going to resolve this issue. I think it's something that's going to take a couple of years of a lot of intensive investment into getting people educated to start taking public transport, to either switching to e-scooters, to either figuring out different ways to move around rather than using their cars, because it's a very weird culture. I mean, I haven't taken public transport in essentially the 4 or 5 years I've been back, and if I am taking it, it's for a novelty or for a reason, even though I should be using public transport and leaving my car in the parking space. In terms of parks, look, essentially, there are a lot of parks in Cyprus, and there are a lot of parks in every single neighborhood you go. The problem is, we're a much probably drier country than even Israel for some reason, and no government is going to basically fund drainage and sewage and watering of the parks to create a park that looks like a park that you imagine, with a bit of grass and some benches and some kids' playgrounds. They are getting a lot better at it now, with trying to plant trees in these parks, trying to provide kids entertainments. But essentially, any real neighborhood you go into, if you just realize by walking around the neighborhood, you will realize that there is already a zoned off area that's meant to be a public use park. So growing up in the areas, I've seen quite a few of these, and especially in the newer neighborhoods, in the newer areas, you will start to see a lot better parks than they were in the past.
Okay. Other question that someone else asked you. You say that when you grew up in the East, let's say people invested more in the East.
Yeah.
Are now things different? Can you explain about how it's shifting today, the situation?
Okay. So essentially, when I was growing up, the West was considered the area you would invest into if you really couldn't afford the East. And it was traditionally invested into by a lot of Cypriot families who were looking to build their home that they were going to then raise their kids into, because it was much cheaper to buy the land. It was much cheaper to go find a contractor on your own and to be able to build the house that you wanted. At the same time, the apartment buildings that were built in the West were done with cheaper materials. So it was basically offering an affordable product to the marketplace at that stage. But over time, things are fundamentally changing. So even though the passenger terminal is in the West, even though now we've got the casino and the general hospital and everything is based in the West, traditionally what you will find is that when you have affluent people coming to work in either the shipping industry or the gaming industry or the high-tech industry, there hasn't really been accommodation in the West that matches their lifestyle. So what you tend to find was that people that were working in the West were living a lot in the East, especially in the shipping industry. I mean, we have the 10th biggest fleet in the world, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of ship numbers. It doesn't mean that we have the people working on the ships, and means that the management level of these shipping companies are based and located in Cyprus. What does that mean? That the execs that are working in these companies are on very, very high salaries. And because they're on such high salaries, and they usually get relocation packages in terms of rent and their salary, the houses in the West didn't match the East. Now, though, because the West has been heavily funded in terms of roads, in terms of parks, in terms of bigger, larger scale projects that Cyprus never had, like the casino, like the golf course that's coming up, like the new neighborhoods that they're creating, you're going to start to see a bit of a fundamental shift towards the West. You're also starting for the first time to see private schools opening up in the West. So there's a school called Silverline Private School where I would say probably maybe 30 to 40% of the students in this school are actually Israeli Hebrew speaking kids. And what does that mean is, even though in the past where you tended to find a lot more only Cypriots buying in these areas, you now find a lot of, I call them locals, but they're not locals. They're people who've lived in Cyprus, who are coming from international countries, and they've just been living in Cyprus for many, many years, who are now choosing to live in the West versus the East. Why? Because why are you going to go buy an apartment for over 500,000 euros to live somewhere in the crowded city in the East when you can buy the same value for a house with a plot, with a garden and a potential pool in the West of Limassol? So I can foresee in the next 5 to 10, 20 years, more of a migration towards the West. And you can also see the West is still kind of highly undeveloped versus the East of Limassol. What does that mean? It means that essentially you're creating gated communities and higher end communities that never really existed in Limassol. And I haven't really seen them, at least myself, anywhere kind of in Tel Aviv when I've been in the past, where what you're getting in the east of Limassol is very much like in Tel Aviv, where you have building, parking space, building, parking space, where the distance between the buildings is maybe 3 to 6 meters, and most of the buildings don't have common facilities or facilities for the people to use. What people are doing now is buying big pieces of land in the West and creating gated communities with facilities that the tenants can use. So they're creating stuff with pools, with gymnasiums, with clubhouses, with basketball courts, with tennis courts. So they're creating communities within a gated, secure complex that then means that if they ever want to come and live there in future, it's perfect for them because that's what they're used to and they want to feel secure. And also they have all their facilities on their doorstep. And also it means they can rent them out until they decide to relocate here or move here, because these types of properties you tend to be able to charge a higher rent for as well.
So basically, some of the things you sent me this project as well. So if I understand correctly from your words, so as of now, people are looking at that location more for vacation because of the casino and things like that. But in the next few years, more and more people will shifting west, and even we will be able to rent the apartment for long term, not only for short term.
Correct. I think even at the moment now, you'll probably be able to rent more for long term than short term. I think the short term will really start to ramp up as the casino becomes more established in not just, let's say, neighborhoods like Israel, but starts to establish itself in Europe and starts to attract people from around the world. Because one thing in the West that you don't have in the East is you don't have any very good hotels in the west of Limassol like you do in the East. So what people are expecting is that as the casino matures, as the golf course starts to come to fruition, you're going to start to see a different type of tourist coming to stay in the west of Limassol.
Like a project, the project that we seen together. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, so just will say a word about Silverline.
Yeah.
If there are some people over here who joined the previous webinar about Limassol, Chen and Aline have mentioned it about Silverline, that there are many Israeli people who are going there, register their kids to Silverline school. So Achiles, just show you where the school is. Tamar, you wanted to ask a question? Tamar? I will ask it for her because, let's see. So Tamar asked, I understand the public transportation is not very comfortable. Do parents need to pick up the kids from place to place, or is there any other solution? So I just would say that regarding schools, I know that the schools provide transportation.
Correct, especially the private schools.
Correct. So if you can give some words about it as well.
Yeah, so essentially you kind of get a 50-50 split in the private schools where you basically pay a fee for either getting your kids picked up from a location very near your house, taken to the school and drop back in the afternoon, or you can do kind of a hybrid where you drop them off in the morning and ask the school to drop them off in the afternoon. Most of the private schools offer these types of services for an add-on fee, but I think pretty much all private schools in Cyprus should offer some sort of facility like that. The public transport is more if your kids are maybe going to a school in the condensed areas of Limassol, and let's say they're doing afternoon sports and they don't have a mode of transport to get back. For example, before Heritage moved to the mountains, we were based in the city center here. So what I used to do when I finished school in the afternoon and I had an afternoon school activity like volleyball or football, what I ended up tending to do was walking down to the beachfront and then taking the number 30 bus across to my house in Neapolis. This was something that just came up, but it's you will see that it's the options are there. It's up to you what you guys will feel comfortable with your kids, how you will take them based around your day.
Okay, perfect. Guys, any other question to Achiles, so you can move forward with the neighborhoods? Okay, I guess you can continue.
Okay, so so we mentioned about Silverline School. So what you'll tend to find is that the cheapest value property in Limassol now is basically the more west you go. So if you go to areas like Erimi, Episkopi, Kolossi, you can tend to find prices for houses the same as apartments. A word of warning, as I said, these areas are not as developed as the east of Limassol, and also the quality of housing is not as good. But you will find when you drive around these neighborhoods is there's so much development happening that if you can understand that maybe you want to position yourselves in this neighborhood for 5 to 10 years, there's a lot of things happening in those neighborhoods. And especially as you come closer towards the west of Limassol, as we mentioned over here, about the casino, the Silverline private school, the My Mall of Limassol, and this is basically effectively where the golf course is under construction now, which is right next to the City of Dreams, which is right next to My Mall. Just a word on the mall in Limassol. The mall was actually the first mall that we ever had in Cyprus. And I remember when I was growing up and everyone was saying, oh, they're building a mall out all the way in Zakagi, no one will ever go there. The people who built the mall, they had such success from it that actually it created the blueprint of another 5 malls in Cyprus. And also now there is a new second mall that's going to be discussed in government to potentially open in the center of Limassol based on the success of the first My Mall over here. The My Mall was actually funded and built by an Israeli company, and more recently it was sold from one Israeli company to another Israeli company, and they're looking to expand the mall to create a cinema house, to create a supermarket, and to even create apartments in the parking lot. So that is fundamentally what you will find in the West. If you're still more adamant and you want to kind of still be in established areas, in good neighborhoods, if you're talking about schools that are based like Silverline in the West, Heritage, Pascal above the highway, or the Island Private School, then I would probably focus your attentions more on areas like Ios Athanasios, Green Area Yermasoya, and Panthea, and to a lesser extent, Ayafila. So to give you guys a bit of understanding, let me just switch this back to the map, will be a bit easier. Limassol has 6 major roundabouts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay? These roundabouts are basically the bloodline between the mountain areas and the city center. One area that was very, very popular when I was growing up because it was easy access. If you come up this road to go towards Heritage and Baloskia, was an area called Ayafila. This area and Neaikali, which is offering some of the best views in Cyprus. However, the problem is this roundabout, you can only go up and down it from this road, meaning in the morning times, it becomes a single lane road. And to connect down to the city for work or to get the kids up to school via this road in the mornings, it becomes kind of a bottleneck situation, which means if you have to compare all the neighborhoods above the highway, effectively Ayafila is probably one that's now a little bit cheaper than the rest because a lot of people know that it has the traffic issue in the mornings as well as during the afternoon pickup run. The other three major roundabouts that connect the cities. So we're talking about Ios Athanasios, we're talking about Mesa Gidonian, we're talking about Yermasoya. All of these three roundabouts can be connected via back roads above the highway, meaning if there is an accident over this one, you can be able to go through the back roads to go to this one. And the same thing for Yermasoya. So what you tend to find is when people are looking for flexibility in being able to connect down to the highway and not be pressured in terms of only having one route to go, a lot of people are choosing these neighborhoods to potentially live in. And to a lesser extent, and depending on the value of the properties, the most high value properties tend to happen in Galogiri and Mesovunia, where we call the Presidential Hill because this is where the ex-president lived. And then as you go up towards Ios Tikonas, Armenochori, you tend to find some really beautiful multi-million pound, multi-million euro villas that are where you tend to find a lot of the richer families based in Limassol. These neighborhoods have a combination of villas, of apartments, depending on how close you are to the highway. But essentially, what you tend to find is a lot of people, when they first move to Cyprus, they move to Limassol, they tend to want to be close to the beach, in walking distance of the beach. And as they start to learn the city and understand where the main areas are, you tend to find that families move from these areas above the highway. My own personal experience, I was brought up in Neapolis. I'm living in Neapolis at the moment, but the apartment I've purchased for myself and where I will live is based around Panthea Ios Athanasios. Why? Because it's much easier for me to connect to my highway to go to my office. It also offers me flexibility in future if I have kids to choose one of the schools that are above the highway. And also if I ever need to go to Paphos or to Larnaca or to Nicosia, which tends to happen quite often, I'm very, very close to the highway, and it's very, very easy to connect to the highway to go to each of the towns.
So who live there? Where do they come from? And I'm not talking about only the Israeli people who lives in Germasoya, Ios Athanasios, and things like in places like that. But what kind of other people live there?
This is what I call the permanent residents of Limassol. So I call them locals, but essentially it's not locals. What I mean by that, I consider someone local who has been in Limassol for more than 3 years, who understands the city inside out and who understands and knows what they're looking for. Because when these people are going to purchase property and to live in property, what you tend to find above the highway is they're building homes and apartments more for living rather than investment. What I mean by this is you tend to get more square meters, you tend to get higher specifications, but on the flip side of that is if you're buying for investment in those areas, you will see that the rent you'll be able to achieve is a little bit lower than what you can in below the highway or towards the east of Limassol. So you're paying a bit of a higher prices because you're paying for premiums like built-in air conditioning, VRV, underfloor heating, floor-to-wall windows, big balconies, bigger size bedrooms, but that doesn't correlate to being able to rent them for a higher price. So it's quite unique that what you will tend to find is people that are buying in those areas are buying to live rather than buying to rent. I
see. And what is the cost per square meter, let's say the average above the highway in that locations?
Okay.
And let's say if I buy let's say a new apartment or a new villa?
Okay, I don't want to say buy per square meter, because it's not, you can't apply the same laws that you guys have in Israel, where you compare everything to the square meterage price, because all the developers do tricks in terms of what they include as the total square meterage, because some of them will include covered veranda, uncovered veranda into the square meters. Some of them will include the common area. Some of them will include the storage area. So I don't want to base a price off the square meter, but what you fundamentally get and what we usually deal with in Cyprus is dealing with the client's budget. So what you will find is, if you're wanting to buy a 1-bedroom apartment in these neighborhoods, by 1 bedroom, I mean 1 bedroom plus salon. When I mean 2-bedroom, it's 2-bedroom plus salon. So when you're talking about a 1-bedroom apartment, you're effectively talking between 190 to 230, 240, 250,000, depending on the specifications and the size of the apartments. If you're talking about a 2-bedroom apartment, you're usually talking now in the region of about 280 all the way up to about 500,000, depending on if it has unobstructed sea views, depending if it's got the full package and bells and whistles of appliances and kitchen goods and stuff like that. And then if you're going for a 3-bedroom apartment, you're probably talking between 320 also up to about 500, 550,000. If you're then going to go for a house, it can vary. Prices can start, if you're going for a semi-detached house, from probably around 400, 450,000 euros for a 3-bedroom house. And then that can go up to anything between 2, 3, 4 million, depending on the size of the land, the views, and the quality of the house you're going to end up living in.
So basically, that's the reason I asked you that question, because many times you and I discuss about it, that Israeli people are coming and ask you, okay, what is the price per square meter?
Yeah.
So I wanted you to explain it, because some people here asking me on group chat, WhatsApp, they even called me and say, okay, so what is the price per square meter in Limassol compared to Larnaca, Paphos, and things like that. So it was good that you actually explained to them that in Cyprus, it's not how you calculate it, because it's a different way to measure the price. Okay,
Exactly.
Daniel, you have a question.
Yes. Are there differences within the neighbors? Like within the neighborhoods? Like when you're speaking about Agios Thanasios or even Agios Tikonos, are there differences between different parts of the neighborhood?
There is subtle differences. So if you focus on this area just above Mesa Idonia, which is called Panthea, you will realize that the roads are wider, the pavements are bigger, the buildings tend to be a bit more of a higher standard, because this is a little bit of a newer neighborhood than the traditional Agios Athanasios. You're not going to feel major differences between the neighborhoods, but you will start to realize that you will tend to find that potentially this one here above the grammar school and around around this area tends to be probably 5 to 10% even more expensive than Agios Athanasios and Yermasoya.
And what about Tikonos?
Agios Tichonas.
Yes.
So Agios Tichonas, it's something that it's quite hard to explain from looking at it on the map, but the way Agios Tichonas is based and the road that it has going into it, you tend to have found, at least when I grew up, the really, really rich multimillionaires were building their villas in that area. So you can really get some really fancy, amazing looking houses, but they are charging crazy prices for it. But then you can also find houses that are very reasonably priced, but then people start to get confused why the price is so different between the one and the other. And that's essentially because some of the houses are based on corners of mountains that offer complete amazing views of all of Limassol, where the other ones are maybe on the back of the mountain, which has no views of Limassol, but has views towards a mountain, for example. So it's something that you kind of need to drive around that neighborhood to look and feel and understand it a bit better.
Thank you.
No worries.
What did you say about Italy and the new Italy? That it's close to the highway, and what else?
so again, it's close to the highway. It connects very, very easily to this main road. And this road is the road that basically takes you up towards Heritage and the Island School. To understand the mountain area of Cyprus, it's basically up here, it's called Troodos, okay? And essentially, this is the main road that goes up to Troodos. When Heritage decided to build and locate itself in this neighborhood, it was essentially a one-lane road going and one-lane road coming. So there's been huge investment now, and even if you go now, you will realize that the roads are being worked on at a slow pace, but at a big, large-scale pace, because what the government wants to do is create a two-lane road from the city going all the way up past Heritage and the Island School, where a lot of the traffic is in the morning, going all the way up through Alalasa, up all the way to Lanya, and eventually Trimiklini. So they kind of wanted to create like a highway road going up to the mountain area, because you will have a lot of traffic congestion, at least for the next year, going from the west to the east of Limassol, trying to connect onto this road to take your kids to school in the morning. Based on that, you will find a lot of people trying to find houses in the Nea Ekali area, because it allows them to bypass the big bottleneck point of this roundabout to attach onto this road and then go up to the schools in the morning.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks.
I think that was essentially what I had to present and talk about. So I'm open to any questions you guys might have. Just going again to the center, this is the main kind of touristic area of Limassol, where you have the Limassol Marina, you have the old port, where it's just basically some really nice restaurants, and then you kind of have the old town of Limassol, which is what I kind of associate with Jaffa, Tel Aviv, in terms of new and old type of feeling to it. A lot of people love to walk around the old towns in the evenings, and you will find that on Friday and Saturday night, it's almost impossible to park your car anywhere around these neighborhoods, because this is where all the bars, clubs, restaurants are based, that people are going during the weekends.
So I would like you to speak about something. So basically, there are some people over here looking for, in one hand, let's say investment, on the other hand, and maybe to move to Cyprus with the family. So they're asking me, where should they buy an apartment or a house? So some of them asking me, what about Neapolis? What about, like, let's say, under the highway? So from your perspective, what should they do?
So I will give you my personal view on it. I'm not saying I'm correct. I'm not saying I'm wrong. I'm just giving you what I see is going to slowly start happening in Limassol in the next 10 to 20 years. There was a huge push just when I arrived here for a lot of people to buy old apartments, to renovate and to fix up between the areas of Neapolis to Podamos Germasoyas. So we're talking about this area here. This effectively, if you have to look at price per square meter, is probably the most expensive land area in all of Cyprus, which means the value of the properties tends to be higher than anywhere else. Why? It's because with people who are staying in Limassol and understand Limassol, they know that probably Airbnbs and their properties that they are renting will rent for a higher price in these two neighborhoods, because it's very, very easy to connect to the hotels, the 5-star hotels towards the east of Limassol, and it's very, very walkable as well to Limassol Marina in the evening time. So myself, who live in Neapolis right now, what I will tend to do on the weekend is I will go for a walk from here into the Limassol Marina. It's 2.5 kilometers. It takes me 30 minutes. And then I do what I need to do in town, and then I'll either take a taxi or I'll walk back. At the same time, if I want to walk towards the Podamos Germasoya area, it's the same sort of thing where you're half an hour this way, half an hour back. So even though this is the epicenter of Limassol, actually these two neighborhoods are the most heavily invested ones, and we're the ones where you can probably charge the higher rents for. Saying all of that, the buildings tend to be quite old. We are not as powerful as other countries in terms of how you maintain and you look after the buildings, meaning each building will have its kind of own committee, and each building will have its own unique characteristics depending on the age of the building, depending on the power of the people and the owners and the landlords of those buildings to say if it's a good investment or a bad investment. You tend to find buildings that are essentially built late 1990s, early 2000s, where a lot of these buildings are coming towards the stage where they're needing substantial investment from the landlord. So you're probably talking between 5,000 to 15,000 euros between each apartment in the building to put the money in to start to fix the aesthetic look of the building, as well as some of the pipes and the internal problems that appear over time. If you're going to buy a brand new build in these areas, you're going to pay a very high premium for it. Essentially, for example, 2-bedroom apartments are starting around 450,000 euros and can go up to around 1 million euros, which to me fundamentally doesn't make sense when you can take the same money and invest it either in the west of Limassol for 2 properties for the same amount of money in a gated complex with facilities, versus just buying something in a standalone building in let's say the most exclusive, expensive neighborhood. Over time, if you're asking my opinion, what are people going to do? I think that as the gated complexes with facilities will start to enter the marketplace and start to add a different price point in terms of, I am working in IT, I am working in the technology company, I'm coming to come live in Limassol for 1 year. What am I looking for when I'm coming to rent? I'm looking for somewhere that has a swimming pool, has facilities, has ability for me to meet people, and is connected kind of close to the city center. And am I willing to pay the same amount of money to be in Neapolis, but to have none of those facilities and to be in an older building and a less energy efficient based building? My guess and my assumption is no. So a lot of my investors, at least for the last few years, I've been concentrating a lot on the West, because the west of Limassol, when I first started in this business, was 2 times cheaper than the east of Limassol. Even though Limassol continues to rise in terms of their values, and even though the east is rising as well, the west is now effectively only 1.5 times cheaper than the east, meaning the clients that started investing with me 3 to 4 years ago in the west of Limassol, their capital appreciation in terms of the value of the property and the rental income they're going to do, it means they have invested pound for pound better than they would have invested in the east of Limassol. That's not saying that the east of Limassol is all of a sudden going to disappear or the prices are going to drop. It's still always probably going to be more expensive than the west and more in demand than the west. I just think that if I had the value and the ability to invest into 2 properties for the same as 1 property, why would I invest in 1?
And what about the rent? Let's say the price in order to rent 2-bedroom apartment in Neapolis, let's say by the zoo. What should be the average cost for that? Because right now, as you know, you can see any price, like even 2-bedroom apartment gets to 2.8, let's say to 2,800, even 3,000.
So I've seen kind of 3 times big price increases in my time in Limassol in the last 7 years. The last big increase happened after the Russian war, and that was because Cyprus was a home already to many, many Russians, and also it was the easiest country for a technological or a digital company in Russia or Ukraine to open up a European jurisdiction office, because there is a very easy route to market in terms of setting up a business, getting work visas, and being able to start working as of tomorrow, versus them trying to do the same thing in Portugal or Malta. So what you found was, after the war started and 1 month into the war, we had a huge influx of digital and tech companies from Russia moving to Cyprus. And what happened was they were predominantly basing themselves around Limassol because there was a lot of people who spoke the same language. And then what you started to see was that the rents pretty much doubled overnight. What you're starting to see is as more developments come to market and more product comes to market, actually slowly the prices are starting to come down to what I deem as being more realistic to what the market should be offering those apartments for. So if you're talking about a 2-bedroom in Neapolis now, a renovated apartment, but in an old building, I'm probably telling you, you're looking between the regions of 1,600 to 1,850, depending on the quality and the style and the furniture you're putting in the apartments. If you're going to go for a 1-bedroom, 1-bedrooms are the most in-demand product in the marketplace. Why? Because the majority of the workforce and the majority of the renters are digital nomads who are based between the ages of 25 to 35, who are not married yet or in a relationship where they don't have kids, they only have one pet, and they're basically looking to do a couple of years in Cyprus before deciding whether they want to continue to live here or move back to their country of origin. So the 1-bedrooms, you can probably rent between 1,000 to 1,300, 1,400, maybe even a little bit more, depending on if it has any facilities. And then that's the same thing kind of across Limassol. If you're going to say the West, you're probably talking about a 5-10% differential in terms of pricing being a little bit lower, but you're not going to struggle to rent the apartment whether you buy in the West or the East. You're not getting a huge discrepancy in terms of people calling you to rent property.
Amazing. Okay. Someone over here asked it as well. Let's see the question 1 second. Before you spoke about Zakaki, so
Yeah.
someone asked, is it a good time to invest within 1.5 kilometer radius of the new casino? Let's say like Zakaki and all this area.
It's going to depend on what project you're buying into and at what stage. So I still think the West offers the most opportunity for capital appreciation, especially the closer you get towards the main hub, which is the mall, the casino, and the golf course. But it depends which project you're looking at. The earlier you buy in, to me, the better, because even though you're not earning returns straight away, and you do have some risk in terms of the developer developing and finishing the product, it means you are buying in a lower price, you're not committing all your money, and you will naturally get the same capital appreciation that you would have got from rental income. The only difference is you're not getting euros back in your bank account straight away.
Okay, and last question that I've received: are there any less recommended neighborhood in Limassol?
Look, there's it's something I speak about when I drive around. It's amazing because when you're looking at a map of Limassol and you're seeing that this is the epicenter of Limassol, people think that buying property right on the seafront over here is a wise investment. Personally, I don't like not this side of the road, but this side of the road, because what you are tending to find is it's the only area of Limassol where the buildings are on top of each other. The buildings were all built kind of in the 1970s and 80s, so they're really old buildings. And then also you are having a lot of third country shops on the ground level, where you are tending to find a different style caliber type of person in the evening times, and people don't naturally feel as safe as they would in other neighborhoods like Neapolis or Germasoya. So what you tend to find is, even though there's a lot of companies and it's where the courts are, you tend to find that the people who are able to afford a little bit higher, nicer properties tend to choose Neapolis or Germasoya and then travel into work. Apart from that, it really, I always say, it depends on the requirements of the clients. You know, specifically around town, you must appreciate you're not going to get that much natural light. The roads are a lot smaller. You're probably going to have a lot of issues with parking. you will tend to find tenants who are staying for 1 year or 18 months at a time, where you're not going to usually get tenants who are staying for 3 or 4 years, because when they realize the city a bit better, they tend to move a little bit out because they know that they can travel in much easier. But it all comes down to the appetite of the investor. Each investor is different. It depends on their requirements. My goal is to listen to what they have to say and then to offer suggestions based on my experience, but I'm only giving a helping hand to explain what I know based on my growing up in the town. At the end of the day, the decision's always theirs. We will present any options because there are some very, very good options here. You're just paying more of a premium for the properties when you're buying them.
I see. Okay. Guys, do you have any other question to Achilles?
Hi, could I ask?
Yeah.
Of course.
I wrote my question in chat, but I guess you didn't see it. So I would like to ask first if you maybe can tell something about Pyrgos area and Sunni. I understood that it's kind of a village, not so far from Limassol. And also, I would like to know, maybe you can recommend kind of complexes with townhouses or villas and with common water pool. I found one on Motegiyaki, if I say it right. Yeah, it's difficult. So yes, I found one there, but maybe this is in other locations with something like that.
So Mutayagar is here, around Yermasoya. It's just the next neighborhood. It's a very nice neighborhood. Complexes that have a number of villas with a pool. I would say it's going to be dependent on the age of the complex, because the older ones are quite run down. The newer ones are quite pricey. What you tend to find is, why would you go for a complex? You know, Cyprus is a very, very safe country. So what you tend to find is, why are you going to spend the money to pay a premium to live in a complex when you can pay the same amount of money for your own individual plot with your own swimming pool on a different area? So it's something that I think will come to market more, especially as the land values continue to increase. But it's not something that the fundamental market has bought into just yet. The complexes that we have at the moment that have security and facilities tend to be apartment buildings rather than specific villas. And if you do find villa ones, the villas are quite small in terms of what you get.
Okay, got it.
Okay, Pyrgos is, again, so you're probably going to take 20 to 25 minutes to travel from Pyrgos into the city center. It's also quite a developed neighborhood. Pyrgos, they have a very good expat community as well, a big English-speaking community. There is a couple of very good groups that you can ask recommendations and suggestions on Facebook. One of the biggest ones is called al.e.a.d. It's a very active community, and that's focusing predominantly on Limassol East and Amathusa district. So focusing on those areas, they will give you the best advice in terms of how it is living in Pyrgos, in Moni, Monagruli, Pareklisha, because those are the neighborhoods where they tend to live in. They have some issues when there is storms. They tend to lose power in the neighborhoods quite a lot, but that's something that sorts itself out usually quite quickly within an hour or two. But that's the real complaints I've heard about people who live in Pyrgos.
Okay. And Sunni?
Sunni, I personally really like Sunni because I like the mountain areas. It's also got some affordable housing. Sunni is a area that takes roughly about 25 minutes to get to Limassol and about 30 minutes to get to Paphos. It's essentially like living in the mountain area, but being close to the city center. That's why people fall in love with Sunni. The build density of the whole area is quite low. Meaning what you tend to find is really nice houses on big plots with swimming pools mixed in with pine trees, a very active community, young community in terms of having dogs, kids playing on the streets. It's quite quiet.
Oh.
What was happening in Sunni, so you understand, Sunni was very, very popular with the English community in the early 2000s. And what happened was the developers were buying very, very big pieces of land and building many, many villas on these pieces of land. What has happened, though, is because these projects were 100, 200 units, and you need to complete all those villas before issuing separate title deeds. A title deed is like the registration at the taboo, where you have your property in your name. To be able to do all of that, you need to finish the whole project. So a lot of these houses are still on sectional ownership based on the master plan. And what you tend to find is they were bought a lot by English people in the past. So there's quite a lot of price discrepancy in the area. So you can find quite good priced villas. There just might be some issues regarding the title deed. So I would say be very careful in terms of when picking a property there to do the due diligence behind it. I'm not saying that they are never going to finish them. It just might put you in the driving seat in terms of when it comes down to negotiation.
Okay, great. Thank you. And about neighborhood, who is living there mostly? Like, can you?
I've rented to some Israeli families, Russian families, Ukrainian families, Cypriot families, English families.
Mixed, very mixed.
Multinational.
Great. Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
Very helpful. Thanks.
Achilles, last question from my hand regarding the ROI. Many people ask me what is the ROI, at least average ROI in Limassol.
If we have to say a base number, we're talking between 5 to 7%. I like to say it's between that value if you're buying immediate property for immediate return, with not that much risk. However, if you're going to be buying into projects that have still some construction time, or even being off plan with a 1 or 2 year build time, you tend to find that by the time the project finishes and you start to rent the property out, you could possibly be earning between even 7 to 8%. If you're then going to be renting short term, if the property allows, and it's in an area that you can rent short term, so I'm talking maybe some of the areas around the casino, some of the areas in Neapolis and Germasoya, you could maybe achieve another 1 to 2% on the yield, but it really comes down to the property you end up buying.
Amazing. Guys, do you have any other question to Achilles?
Yes, I have.
Hi.
Perfect.
You hear me? Hi.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I have 2 questions. The first one is, if I would like to buy 1-bedroom apartment, let's say resale up to 15 years old apartment, and to rent it to high-tech people that came to work in Limassol for a few years, which are the best area to buy? This is the first question. And the second question is, which area I have to be careful, because there are, let's say, people from Sudan or immigration that people don't like to live there.
Yeah.
I have been told, for example, that very close to the marina, at a little bit west area, it's a bad area, or it's called, how you call it? Let's see in the map.
Molos.
Kato Polymedia or something like this.
Yeah.
I've been told it's a bad area. So could you please give me where is the best area and where is the worst area?
So the worst areas, you've kind of hit the nail on the head. It's what I spoke about in the beginning. I think the closest you go to Molos Road over here, I would avoid it a little bit, not because you won't be able to rent it out. I think you're just going to be turning over your tenants each and every year, as the people who rent from you will start to learn a little bit about Limassol and then probably move out of your property after the 1-year contract. Saying that, however, if you go a couple of roads behind here, where you have this shopping streets, you have a lot of nice properties coming up in these areas, which are much more factored towards student accommodation, as well as young professionals who are working in the high-tech world. So one of the areas I will tell you is Katholiki, which is essentially over here. And then the other area is, again, depending on your appetite for the West and the understanding that the West is upcoming, is taking a 1-bedroom in one of the gated complexes and projects that's coming out. If you have a 1-bedroom at the moment anywhere in Limassol, you're renting them because they're in such demand. But if you are going to have a 1-bedroom, let's say in Kato Bolemithkia or Ipsonas or Kolossi or in that Molos area that you mentioned, you're basically just going to have to drop the rent a little bit in terms of where you're going to buy. If it was me, I would specifically look Katholiki, and then I wouldn't discard some areas around the West. And then also, if you focus a little bit above the highway, but if you're going to focus on this area, you must bear in mind that you won't be able to ever rent the properties out short term because it won't work. It will only be for long term. If you go anywhere between the area of Yermasoya and Ios Athanasios, you have Foley School, you have the German Oncology Center, which is a very prestigious hospital where it's very, very high end, very, very expensive in terms of some of the procedures that they do. And they have very high paid nurses and doctors who are coming to perform surgeries at the hospital. And more recently, they've opened up a college in this area as well, meaning if you are going to be buying something 1-bed in this area, you shouldn't ever have a problem either renting out to college students, professors, teachers, small families, or doctors or nurses. So this is also a very, very good area if you can find 1-bedroom apartments. Just bear in mind, you probably won't be able to rent them out short term, meaning that when you're buying the property, and most likely you're going to be buying an under construction property because there aren't that many 1-beds in that area, the VAT of the 19% will be a sunken cost that you won't be able to redeem.
So, okay.
Yana, you have a question as well, right?
Thank you.
No problem.
Yes, about the villages and Sunni that you mentioned, does it make any sense to drive from there to the schools area, or it's too far, or maybe the road is too busy or something? Or
no, you have a lot of families actually purposely choosing Sunni and having their kids in heritage or the island. It comes down to preference. If you like that nature feeling and you like the idea of being in between pine trees, being in the mountain but being super close to the city, probably Sunni is one of those neighborhoods and one of those areas that will offer you the best of all worlds.
okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I say that I shared Achilles' number in the chat group. You can approach him via WhatsApp. If you have any questions regarding the locations, regarding investment, regarding overall, you want to ask him something about it, please feel free to approach him.
Let me just share this
in the group. Okay.
Group on the chat.
Could you also please share this group in Facebook? I didn't.
Yes. Can you
an
text me?
opportunity to yes. Yeah, of course.
Text me and I will send you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Let me just send this here. So that is the map that we discussed today. I think just the final thing from my point is obviously if you want to discuss anything in more detail, I'm happy to jump on a Zoom call directly with you anytime or you guys directly. You have my number, you have my information. My company is called IPN Cyprus. We're based in Limassol. I have a team of 4 or 5 of us based in Limassol and a few more based in Larnaca. I focused much more on Limassol, but we're not just focused on Limassol, so we also cover Paphos and Larnaca to a large extent. anything you guys need, any questions you have, you know, I've been where you are. I've decided to move back to Cyprus, even though I am Cypriot. So I've dealt with a lot of the pains that you guys might end up going through if you do decide to move or invest here. So please just ask me any questions you have. You have my number, and we can talk from there.
Let's see if that's the website. Yes, that's okay. Achilles, thanks a lot.
No problem at all.
Appreciate your time, guys. Thank you very much for joining us. Of course, it's recorded, so I will upload it to the Facebook page.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you, guys.
Take care, guys. All the
Bye
best.
bye.
Have a very good evening. Bye bye.